Gracias to the University of Washington-Tacoma and to our ancestors and community members who have and continue to create enduring cultural legacies. Con mucha humildad reconozco nuestro legado artístico y cultural. Gracias. Many of you know me from my work in the community, but I'd like to share a little bit about me. What y'all may not realize is that I started working the arts and culture kind of young, like 3 years old. My parents sold all their furniture. They bought a 1967 GMC van and decided to drive to Mexico. Not just to Mexico, but through Mexico. We drove all the way to the Yucatan Peninsula and then to Oaxaca. And living in that van, the child of a Chicano activist and an Italian-American nurse, I spent months walking among ancient pyramids, delighting in the taste of ripe mango, tasting salt water on my lips at beaches where resorts were yet to be built. I navigated crowded mercados full of brilliant colors, striking smells, and cacophonous sounds, some recognizable and others completely new to me. Upon returning and settling in San Francisco, my mom worked nights as a nurse. She would sleep in the mornings, but on certain afternoons, she would put me in my favorite crimson corduroy peacoat, the one with little anchors on the buttons, and we would explore the city. Golden Gate Park, museums, libraries, the Japanese tea garden, and my favorite, drum circles by the wharf. It wasn't until later that I started my formal training in the arts. When I was 9, I convinced my parents to rent a trumpet. But the only problem was that our landlord wouldn't let me practice in our flat. So I would pack up the trumpet and my music and walk to a park bench to practice. And I want to apologize to all the people in the 4 square block radius that had to endure that part of my musical development, but I can guarantee you that the experience of playing on that park bench was much more important than any of the notes I learned. Later, my family moved back into my native Southwest to Tucson, and this was my time in the desert, not because I was in an actual desert. An actual desert is beautiful and it's teeming with life. On the contrary, this was my time in the desert because I experienced an educational system that erased me, that made me invisible, made me culturally invisible. I was living in the unceded lands of the Tohono O'odham Nation, 20 miles from the Mission San Javier del Bac, one of the oldest structures in the Western United States. But none of that was in the curriculum. Instead, these assimilation-minded Reagan years presented a much narrower view of culture and vilified the arts at the national level. I couldn't find room for my story or my community's story. But at the same time, I was also in the school of my parents. And in the school of my parents, my classes were tamaladas and family reunions. Guayaberas were my school uniform. And both my parents, who were working in community healthcare, were also teaching me about the importance of working for others. They were teaching me that essentials like healthcare and self-expression are rights, not privileges. Fast forward to my early 20s, and as a percussionist back in San Francisco, I was recruited to play Latin rhythms for flamenco guitarists. So I have to explain that as a Chicano, we have a love-hate relationship with Spain, the land of flamenco. Spain is the land of the conquistadores who ravaged the lives of our indigenous ancestors. But I started to complicate my very black and white view of Spain and to look at it as a place where Romans and Sephardic Jews encountered German Visigoths and North African Berbers and Syrian Arabs, and somehow out of that mix, this culture emerged. And I began to understand how the Iberian Peninsula instead was this inflection point between Europe and North Africa, between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. Before I knew it, I was on the cusp of a 6-year immersion into Arabic and Middle Eastern music. And this was right around the time that 9/11 happened, and lines were drawn in the sand. And otherness, particularly along these lines, became not only something that was perceived as difference, but as danger. Everyone was ready to see each other in the worst light possible. Does that sound familiar at all to us in 2022, where people who have different viewpoints or different experiences are seen as the other? But at that moment, I was in the midst of exploring how all our stories tied us together through art and language, common histories, even the spices that we use in our kitchens. At that moment, art saved me. When the world was leaning apart, arts and culture were helping me to see how it could lean together. Arts belong in our daily lives. Yet society pushes back all the time with the argument that arts are no more than a nice to have or a pleasant extra, but never a must have. But if that's the case, then why did one of our students in our Ballet Folklorico program confide that, in her words, when I wanted to give up everything, this was the only thing that kept me going? Think about that for a second. In a moment of incredible adversity, when that student was facing all kinds of challenges, both personal and academic, the one thing that was helping her persevere is often the thing that gets cut first. No, the arts are not an add-on. They're not a luxury. They are as essential as food and air. They are as personal as the mixtape you made for your first crush, and as communal as that urge to dance when you're at a wedding and you hear that tick, 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 and you know you got to get on the floor for that cumbia. The arts allow us to cope with and process our challenges and imagine where we want to be. Thinking back to that time when I was little in Mexico and those adventures in San Francisco, I didn't know it at the time, but I was being prepared to do the work that I'm called to do today, which is to utilize the arts to help our society move through a time of challenge and polarization, to give voice and vision to what we can be, and to move away from what we're afraid of. Thank you for honoring the arts with this award. I am humbled to be associated with it.